Okay, thank you everybody for coming to this webinar. I would like to thank all of you on behalf of Good Governance Africa, the board, and Good Governance Africa, Eastern Africa, and myself to participate on this important webinar. Please allow me to say a few things about Good Governance Africa, Good Governance Africa, Eastern Africa, and this webinar. Good Governance Africa is an African-based civil society organization established in 2012 with the aim of contributing its share to the improvement of governance performance, enhance accountability and transparency, and strengthen the rule of law across the continent. The organization has a mission of striving to improve the life of citizens by promoting enhanced governance on the continent of Africa. In order to achieve this mission, GGA promotes fact-based knowledge that arises from topical research, critical conversation, and advocacy. GGA has a regional office in different parts of the continent, and GGA Eastern Africa is one of these regional offices established in Addis Ababa in 2020. The regional office works on 5 thematic areas: natural resource management, grassroots governance, ethics and society, youth development and migration, and peace and security. Although the timing of the opening of the regional office coincided with the spread of COVID-19 in the region in general, the East African office tried its level best to launch its operation in 2020 and try to work on different thematic areas. One of the areas we were working in 2020 was a program on the health, economic, social, and governance impact of COVID-19 in Ethiopia. On its governance thematic topic on Ethiopian political situation, in 2021, GGA East Africa launched a new dialogue project on Ethiopian election 2020. Although many people may have different interpretations on its direction, outcome, and local and regional impacts, the past few years showed us a new political change in Ethiopia. The postponement of the national election set for 2020 has increased the tension among different political groups in the country. Now, June 21 is set as a new date for the election. As I said, there are many arguments both pro and against on this measure. GGA Eastern Africa, as a think tank promoting informed debate, designed a public dialogue series entitled Ethiopian Election 2021 and Hope for Democratic Transition, the role and responsibilities of different stakeholders. In the first phase of this project, we had 4 panel discussion sessions on the role of civil society, the media, election governance, and the role of the youth. Panelists were drawn from the ruling and opposition political parties, civil society organizations, academicians, the media, and from other sectors. In those 4 sessions, we really had good, informed, and civilized discussion. Questions were asked on different issues, ranging from the one that questions the very validity of the election to the detailed implementation challenges of the election. Today's webinar is the second part of this project. It aims to deliberate on the implication of the election on Ethiopian politics, its impact, and possible scenarios. I hope we will have informed and fruitful discussions. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all for our panelists, Professor John Abing, Professor Kasaun Branu, and Dr. Lovisa Allen, who entertained our request in such a short time. I would also like to thank our colleagues in other Good Governance Africa regional offices for their support and critical comments. Last but not least, I also like to thank Professor Baharu Zaure, Professor Emeritus of History and Board Chairman of Good Governance Africa, Eastern Africa, for his willingness and his reserved support, and today for moderating this webinar. I also thank all those people who are tuned to this webinar, and thank you very much. Back to you, Prof. Baharu.
Okay, thank you very much, Zarihun. I would like to reiterate the welcome of Dr. Zarihun, the Executive Director of GGA Eastern Africa, to welcome both the panelists and other participants who are tuned in this webinar. I look forward to a robust discussion on the forthcoming elections, which is beset, as you know, with so many challenges. Allow me to give you a brief historical overview of parliamentary elections in Ethiopia. Although parliamentary elections are now 90 years old, Ethiopians are still yearning for a genuinely representative, free and fair election. The first election, or the first time that the parliamentary procedure or parliamentary process came into play was following the 1931, the promulgation of the 1931 Constitution, which provided for a bicameral parliament, but the upper house was the members of the upper house being appointed by the emperor, and even the members of the lower house not elected, but actually by the people, but by government officials and the nobility. In this respect, the 1955 Constitution represented an improvement because it allowed for an elected lower house. But these representatives were elected not to govern, but to advise, because governance was still exclusively the realm of the emperor. But even then, there was some vigorous competition for seats in parliament on an individual basis rather than by party, because parties were not allowed at the time. The saving grace of this structure or this arrangement was that there were energetic debates on some important issues, boundary issues, loan issues, and so on, and some vigorous some energetic holding of the executive to account, including inviting ministers and grilling them on some of the questions, on some of their achievements and failings. The Derg, which came to power in 1974, as you know, promulgated its own constitution in 1987. But this again was dominated by one party, the Workers' Party of Ethiopia, and election to the Congress was limited to the 3 candidates nominated by the party, and looked like the beginning of a new dawn, a new era in parliamentary elections. The 1994 Constitution provided for a similar bicameral parliament, and following that, in 1995, the first elections, national and regional elections were held, and elections have been held every 5 years after that. But these elections, as many of you know, were beset by a number of problems. Initially, multi-ethnic parties were excluded. There was absence of a level playing field, intimidation of opponents, and punitive measures taken against supporters of opposition parties, which led to recurrent boycotts by the opposition parties. The 2005 election, which still remains fresh in our memory, represented a promise, but also was followed, unfortunately, by a kind of apocalyptic aftermath. The promise was in the pre-election and the election. And the apocalypse came after the elections, when there was erupted violence against the results, announcement of the results, which was not compatible with expectations. So now we are now on the threshold of what is officially known as the 6th, but what some people call the first real elections in Ethiopian history, because the past elections, as I have already indicated, were not quite fair and free. But it is held in the midst of multiple challenges, security challenges, governance challenges, even weather, we're not quite sure. So there are also some significant parties that are not participating in the elections. On the other hand, over 40 parties are competing vigorously through debates, through campaigning for the election, which is going to be held in about 20 days' time. The question that's facing us now is, will the 2021 elections be the dawn of a new era of parliamentary democracy in Ethiopia, or will we have a repeat of 2005, which started with such promise and then, of course, turned so sour? So to discuss these challenges and promises, we have a distinguished panel of three academics: Professor John Abing, Professor Kasaon Berhanu, and Dr. Louise Allen. Professor Abing, let me introduce the panelists now. He's a political anthropologist and professor of politics and governance in Africa at Leiden University and the African Studies Center. Until 2017, he was a research professor of African ethnic studies at VU University, VU being an acronym for Dutch, the university which I cannot pronounce in Dutch, in Amsterdam.
Yeah, Free University, yeah.
Okay, yeah, rather difficult. I tried to pronounce it. He was a visiting professor at various other international universities and has been associate fellow of the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences since 2014. He has carried out anthropological historical research on Ethiopia and Northeast Africa since 1990 in the field of socio-political history, ethnicity, political culture, religion and politics, and culture and environmental management. In 1999, he co-edited a book on election observation and democratization in Africa. He has also written several articles on Ethiopian elections. Recent books edited and co-authored include Reconfiguring Ethiopia, The Politics of Authoritarian Reform, in collaboration with Tobias Hagman, the Suri Orature, and the Environmental Church in Africa, the Environmental Crunch in Africa, and Rhetoric and Social Relations. Turning to Professor Kasaon Berhanu, is a professor of political science and international relations at Addis Ababa University, where he has also served in different administrative and academic positions. In addition to his affiliation with different professional societies related to his academic career, Professor Kasaon is widely published on different issues pertaining to the broader discipline of political science, decentralization and governance, state-society relations, peace building and conflict management, higher education governance, political economy of policy making, elections and electoral systems, constitutionalism, and party systems. He is a fellow of the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences and also currently serves as member of management boards of different governmental and non-governmental organizations. During the years of his continuous service as a tenured professor, Kasaon has received various awards as visiting professor and guest researcher at different European and North American universities. Our third panelist, Dr. Louise Allen, is a research director at Christian Michelsen Institute in Bergen, Norway, and she has followed politics on the Horn of Africa for the last 20 years. She has had several long-term research visits and extensive fieldwork experience in Ethiopia. Her publications include books and articles on the ethnic-based federal system, on decentralization and democratization, and women's empowerment. She has followed the electoral process on the ground in Ethiopia since 2000 as the second election, both at national level and at regional level, in Tigray and in the southern nations, nationalities, and people's regional state. So these are our panelists, and we'll address to them a series of questions to which they will react. And then after their reactions, eventually we'll take some questions from the audience as well, and they will give their responses to the questions and comments that will be forthcoming. So let's begin first of all with what is the distinctive feature of this particular election, or in other words, what makes this election different from earlier elections in post-1991 Ethiopia. As I said, we have had 5 elections before. This is the 6th elections since 1991. So what, in your opinion, are the differences and similarities between this election and the previous elections? Let me start maybe with Professor Kasaon Berhanu, and then also the others. I think since you have observed quite a number of elections in the past, you will also give your feedback.
Thank you, moderator. I would like to state a number of things that makes the 6th or the upcoming elections distinct from the earlier ones, meaning 5 of them. The first in the list, in my list, is revitalizing the Electoral Management Authority. As you are aware, new members of the Ethiopian Election Board have been installed, and their selection and subsequent appointment has been characterized by background checks and vetting, including by opposition parties, that affirmed their track record of integrity, honesty, and professionalism. As opposed to this, the constitution of the previous election boards, successive election boards or management authorities, were simply done on the basis of ensuring their subservience to the ruling parties. In other words, they have been merely supplicants of the ruling party, and therefore, in the absence of neutralism, non-partisanship, so on and so forth. The second relates to the fact that since April 2018, a pro-reform leadership that is charged with the responsibility of managing public affairs has been in place. And this leadership has vowed that it would ensure, facilitate, and support the holding of free, fair, and competitive elections, and again pledged to desist from unduly interfering in matters that are associated with election, which was not the case in the past. The other relates to introducing series of reforms covering the justice sector, the police and security sectors that in one way or another are involved in overseeing the smooth conduct of elections. These reforms were also accompanied by bringing on the scene leadership whose leaderships that are believed to act according to the laws that govern electoral exercises in Ethiopia. The other relates the participation of formerly exiled political parties. The Ethiopian Citizens for Social Justice is one, and a faction of the OLF whose election has been recently endorsed by the courts pending however, much replete with some loopholes than making the election free, fair, and competitive. I stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Kassaon. You have given us quite an exhaustive list of peculiarities of this particular election. It's in fact a kind of panoramic view. Maybe for the benefit of our external audience, we may specify a bit more clearly the surrogate parties that you mentioned, which have been deregistered now, just so that people would know what you mean by surrogate parties.
I was referring to parties like the Oromo Federalist Congress that unseated the founder members, the CUD, the revitalized CUD by the EPRDF, among others.
Amharic term Tinijit is much more commonly known. Okay, thank you. I think we'll come back to some of the questions that you raised. Maybe I would ask Professor Abing and Dr. Allen to react briefly, to supplement briefly what you think were the distinctive features of this election compared to the previous elections.
First of all, a word of caution. I mean, as foreigners, Farenji, we should be cautious and measured in our responses. I mean, we are outsiders, and what I can give is mostly, let's say, speculation, informed speculation, okay, about the process, and not scientific conclusion, scientific analysis. Anyway, I have followed the electoral processes in some detail in the past 20 years. I must just simply admit that what Professor Kassaon told us is a very adequate survey of the factors pro and con the elections, and I would just add briefly that we start from the idea of these elections compared to what? Compared to what are we going to make judgment on these elections? Compared to all previous elections, maybe with the exception of the 2005, when there was a slight opening, which was botched, of course, by the ruling party at the time, this election of 2021 is taking place under conditions much more favorable towards some kind of process of democracy. It is, first of all, it is more open, more transparent. According to what Professor Kassaon also said, the Navy has fundamentally been reformed. Mrs. Bertukan is really a person of integrity and of professionalism, and they did their best to secure the conditions of a kind of much more honest vote. Secondly, there is a different political and legal background to the whole process of politics and of elections. We can no doubt about it. Thirdly, of course, there are the risks. There is insecurity in the whole country, in Tigray, of course, in the West, in other areas, IDPs abound. But still, this cannot be a motive to stop the electoral process. You have to jump into the deep and see how far the process takes us. I agree fully that there is no more reason or no more opportunity to delay indefinitely. Unfortunately, is also the inordinate amount of foreign pressure by so-called Democrats in the West. I find this personally, as a Westerner, I mean from the EU, I find this deeply embarrassing and totally unacceptable. The prescriptive, sanctimonious way Ethiopia is being approached by many Western parties who are allegedly so concerned about democracy, while their own democracy is also undergoing some phases of crisis. I find this highly doubtful. I mean, they should be much more open, much more, let's say, much more sympathetic to what is happening and to see things in context and in perspective. That's what they don't do. They have a too prescriptive approach, which will not help anybody. So briefly summarizing, the promise of these elections is there. I mean, compared to the previous one, there is a lot of promise. Not all will go well. There will be flaws, there will be abuses, there will be incidents, also from the ruling party, the PP, the Prosperity Party. But nevertheless, this process has more promise than any of the previous ones we have seen. So I would also say, let the process go ahead and see how far it brings us. It can be a step towards a process of serious democratization in a relatively short time, and not a kind of step in the 27-year trajectory of EPRDF when they were saying for almost 27 years, yes, we are making progress. We are a country in democratization in 27 years, and nothing was achieved. You know, remember the 2015 elections? It was a sham with no seat for the opposition. Now this election makes a quantum leap forward, despite the flaws which you will see, and should of course go on and should be applauded and should be supported as much as possible by anybody concerned.
Thank you, Leon. Louisa, please.
Yes, so I probably will be the devil's advocate here in this in this webinar. As I said, I have been following the election since 2000, and I've been trying to see the elections in the past through the prism of a political scientist, applying central theories and standards of political science in order to analyze it. And I would really continue doing that for this election, using the same standards and assessing it as critically as I've done in the past. Of course, as Abink pointed out, it's difficult for us to do this now because we are not on the ground, and we haven't been on the ground for a while. So there are some reservations here, of course. The context is different. It is maybe more polarized and toxic as it has ever been before. It's difficult for us as foreigners, as the so-called experts, to have credibility and legitimacy in the eyes of Ethiopians more than ever before. But still, I would insist on, as an academic, to have the same critical analysis as I've done in the past. When we looked at the electoral processes from 2000, our main finding was that the elections were tools for the incumbent to strengthen its power base. It was, as the political scientist said, it was a system of electoral authoritarianism. So there was no or little division between the party and the state. State resources were used to strengthen the power base of the ruling party. There were increasingly restrictive laws introduced in order to make the playing field even more unleveled in favor of the ruling party. And they had these elections, would they be different? That's the question. Or are there similarities here that will make this election also a main expression of electoral authoritarianism, mainly as a tool for the ruling Prosperity Party to get a mandate and to enforce or to strengthen its power base? That's the big question here. And as Kasahun and John has pointed out, there are important improvements. The electoral board is new, has another capacity, another independence as before. Exiled opposition groups have returned, political prisoners have been released, and also very importantly, the restrictive laws, the main restrictive laws have been revised. And independent media have been allowed to operate. Now lately, there have been some restrictions in this. Essentially, satellite media channels have been closed down. So there are different signs here. But I think one main difference from the past also is that the ruling party doesn't have the very efficient control and mobilization capacity as the EPRDF had in the past. We all know the 1-to-5 networks that were efficiently used in the past to mobilize and control voters on the grassroots. This is no longer the case, maybe for the better, maybe also challenging the control on the ground, which could be a problem. But contrary to maybe to Kasahun and John, I also see some worrying signs of repressive practices continuing. And that is particularly the case after the eruption of the war in Tigray. I saw as early as 2018 and 19, just after Abiy came to power, a clear use of the government media to promote the Prime Minister's politics, to promote the Prosperity Party's politics. And so the government media is increasingly used as a mouthpiece for the ruling party. So that's an essential continuation from the past. As I said, the satellite channels are not able to operate anymore. And we see that international media, you may criticize them for not being balanced in their accounts of the war. That maybe many people would say that, but they are now expelled from the country. So there is less possibility to report undisturbed from all kinds of things going on in Ethiopia. And of course, in Oromia and in Benishangul Gumuz, and maybe not in Amhara now, but in recent past, there have been state of emergencies. The command post is in power. Of course, that has a big impact on the way election campaigns can be conducted. Main opposition leaders are in prison. And major parties are also boycotting elections. And although the electoral board is more independent, more efficient than before, they still have concerns on the intervention of local government officials in the electoral process. They have issued statements as late as around 22nd of May on this. So, I mean, it's not as if all the old bad practices have vanished. They are still there. And there is maybe even more stakes in this election, making it very difficult to see that the overzealous local officials will stop doing what they did in the past. And I think the war in Tigray is making this situation even more difficult. The federal government may feel more entitled to suppress voices that are challenging, of course, the rationale and the conduct of the armed forces in the war, but also other things that challenge the ruling party. So I think the overall atmosphere of the war and the lack of security on the ground is making free debate more difficult. So in my judgment, I would say that it's very likely that these elections would be more similar than different than compared to the previous elections. And I am also worried, you can say a lot about the bad and destructive control and repression during the IPRF. But they may have had also stronger control of what goes on the ground. There are analysts who say that the Prosperity Party has little control beyond the water level. I am saying this as a speculation, not as a finding, but this is an element that I think needs to be taken into account when judging the outcome of this election, the lack of control and whether the elections actually can stimulate more violence on the ground. But I think it's very likely that the Prosperity Party will win. But of course, hoping that the opposition parties will have a substantial share of the vote and the seats in parliament so that you can actually get what was promised, for example, in 2005, without, of course, the violence and the imprisonment that took place.
Okay, thank you. You are anticipating our final point for discussion. Kind of slightly divergent view of the situation, which is a healthy divergence. I think it's going to be welcomed in a webinar and a seminar like this. So we'll probably go, as we go along, we'll probably trash some of these differences, maybe come to some kind of consensus. Some of the things have been anticipated already. I mean, the implication, what the implication is for the absence of some significant political parties like the Oromo Liberation Front and the Oromo Federal Congress, OFECO. Kasaon has mentioned the circumstances, but maybe you could go a bit more into what this means for the final outcome of the election, and also really how you see the position of the other parties. So something like over 40 parties have registered. Some have come up with very elaborate manifestos and have been campaigning vigorously. So how competitive do you think these other parties, the ones that are still in the run, how competitive would they be in getting the kind of respectable figure in parliament? Not 100% as we got last time, but some degree of representation of the opposition in the House of Representatives. Kasaon, would you begin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the boycott by OLF and OFC can be a matter of concern, despite the fact that they have opted to not to participate by presenting a mix of legitimate demands like closure of their offices, imprisonment of their members, and on the other hand, again, putting preconditions like release of release of prisoners that are charged by for committing serious crimes. Well, this may be considered as innocent until proven guilty, but the charge that the government or the prosecutor general has put before the court is very serious. And therefore, the demands by these two organizations, among others, was rejected by the government that stated that if those suspected of committing serious crimes can be released, then others also that are interned due to a number of criminal offenses can lead to that. And therefore, we have tried to express our opinion by stating that what their supporters and colleagues should advocate is that there should be a speedy trial. They should be charged and they should be allowed to defend themselves, and then decisions on the basis of evidence should be passed, rather than asking for release of prisoners that are accused of committing serious crimes. Nonetheless, this could be a cause of concern, since given our experience of the last 2-3 years, some of their supporters might resort to different kinds of protests. On the other hand, the opposition party, the Ethiopian Political Parties Council, including those who have boycotted, have advised their members and supporters to desist from resorting to violence, and in as much as possible try to advance their claims and demands through peaceful means. I am also aware that the government has prepared itself to control unforeseen developments in this regard. Community elders, religious leaders also have appealed to citizens in general and supporters and members of both participating and non-participating political parties to desist from violence. And therefore, on the basis of this, I envisage that occurrence of violence could either be controlled or avoided. Regarding the competitiveness, we are now aware that over 40 political parties are contesting the election. I agree with the assumption that some of you made that there won't be 100% win, both at the federal level and at regional levels. But my anticipation is that the ruling party, the Prosperity Party, could win due to a number of things. Many compatriots feel that conducting the election is a lesser evil. It's not a perfect thing. It is a lesser evil than as compared to not holding the election. Too. The ruling party is relatively better placed in ensuring security, peace and stability, and also protecting the country as compared to other political parties. So had the OLF and the Oromo Federalist Congress participated, it would have made the competition more meaningful. I don't mean that what is taking place in the form of competition is meaningless, but had they been involved, it would have been more meaningful. I agree with some of the propositions that Lovisa had made, usual of her, but under the circumstances we are in, we should bear with that. The conflict in Tigray, well, I don't know why many people in your part of the world don't talk about the genesis, the underlying drivers, so on and so forth, despite the fact that you abundantly or adequately understand and know what has transpired in this regard. So there would be competition, but not the ideal one. Kicking out foreign journalists, I commend the government for doing that. I hope it will continue doing so in the foreseeable future, because some of the journalists that I am taking into account are like some of our journalists around. So if they don't have added value and make a repeat of similar fault lines, then what do they do here? Besides, it's the prerogative of a country to allow in, maintain a journalist or get rid of him or her. Thank you.
Professor Abink, would you like to add to some of this?
Okay, I'll try. It's the second point, the implication of the absence of such prominent political parties, OLF and OFC, on the integrity and credibility of the election.
And the competitiveness of the other. And
indeed, whether it makes it less competitive. No doubt about it, it makes it less competitive. I find it regrettable that OLF and OFC are not participating. This was their chance to show what they are worth. And I'm sorry to say, but I've been following all these ups and downs and these debates of OLF and OFC with the NEBE and with other parties in the party forum and so forth. It seems that their bowing out is a cookie of their own making. I mean, they have taken wrong decisions. They pose impossible demands. I'm sorry to say, but some of these leaders by OFC are in prison because of they have been suspected of serious crimes. A policeman was killed in the Oromia regional office in Addis Ababa. He was killed by people of the OFC, the party trying to get in, forcing off a meeting. Incitement in social media, there is a law against that. In no country in the world, incitement on social media is condoned. This is restricted everywhere, and this went very far. So, look, there is a kind of culture of opposition because of opposition. And in some opposition parties, and maybe also the OLF and the OFC, they thrive in being in opposition against anything, whatever opposition it is, because that's their identity. I'm very disappointed by the involvement of the OFC as a initially promising party speaking to the Oromo regions of Ethiopia, and I think they basically have really missed a big chance to prove their mettle. This, of course, has by implication reduced the competitiveness of the elections. It doesn't mean that they are totally not competitive, because there are still 44 parties left, but it's just a missed chance. And the argument which we'll hear after the elections, coming from certain circles, that the elections are therefore not legitimate, is not acceptable. It's not acceptable at all. You cannot have an electoral process whereby some parties want to impose conditions on the electoral process which go beyond the law and which are in the straight line of their own party program. You have to commit to a compromise formula which was agreed upon in the law and in the political parties forum meetings. So I'm afraid they really missed a big chance, and it's a pity. Of course, yeah, that will be a problem for many areas who would have voted otherwise. The OLF also is, yeah, has been. I'm not sure if they are now. They have been fragmenting into various factions. I mean, 2 or 3 factions which are fighting each other on yes or no on the elections, participating yes or not, or on having links with an armed faction of the OLF. I'm not sure what the final result will be, whether one of the factions of OLF can participate in the elections. I'm not totally aware of that. It would also be a pity if they would have to bow out. So yeah, but you know, once more, it is partly for the larger parts a mistake they themselves made by faulty judgment of the entire process. May I have one more comment on a statement made by the previous speaker, by Lovise? You know, you are casting a critical light on the elections, and true. There are reasons for that. The environment is extremely unstable, but there is so much at stake. You know, we have to be aware of this very volatile context, where Ethiopia is beset by problems not only from internal contradictions, but also by Egypt and Sudan, and of course by the Western propaganda offensive, which we have been seen and unleashed. To say that in comparison, the EPRDF had problems, but had more control of on the ground in the electoral process, meaning giving a semblance of stability, I find that not a convincing argument. Control, yes, stifling control, which completely limited any freedom of expression of the. So what do you want? Do you want stability of people, you know, bullied into submission, or do you want some kind of freedom, albeit in unstable and somewhat chaotic conditions? I would prefer the latter. In that respect, the elections as we are facing in the coming months are still promising and may make a big step forward, and we take the risks. But look, I think the majority of the Ethiopian people want to have their voice heard. They want to express themselves. They are tired of waiting. It would be an insult to say that these elections are meaningless and chaotic and useless. That's totally not fair towards the Ethiopian public.
Thank you very much. Maybe now, of course, it's the turn of Dr. Alan. I think maybe you could also disaggregate your answer in terms of competitiveness into Addis Ababa versus the rest of the country, you know, because in Addis Ababa there are some very strong opposition parties which seem to have quite a heavy, substantial support among the population. Of course, you could also add some more.
Yeah. Of course, I'm tempted to, of course, also answer those comments from the other speakers. I think a general challenge with opposition parties in Ethiopia is that they are somehow personalized and do not have the traditionally not have had sufficient institutionalization in order to be preventing factionalism and also external intervention from the ruling party. And this may also be the case this election. And that may also be one of the reasons why we have this situation where there is not so much competition as we would have wanted. I, of course, agree with John Anakason that this is an extraordinary situation for Ethiopia. It has a lot of external and internal pressure. But as I said in the beginning, I would insist on using the same glasses as I used in the previous elections, being equally critical and using the same standards of that I used before, and not turning a blind eye. We can't turn a blind eye to what goes on in the country, even though there is a war in the north. Egypt and Sudan are threatening. And then when it comes to the situation in Addis Ababa, of course, I have not been there on the ground since then, since a long time. But I know that, Eskinder Nega and the Balderas party, of course, it has maybe some support base there, and they are not able to operate there. So maybe someone else will fill in on the security situation in Addis Ababa, because I'm not updated on that. There was a question about that. So please fill in for me on that. And one other issue which also deals with the situation on the ground is, of course, the situation for the internally displaced people. There were 1.8 million at some time. Of course, there are more people now with the Oromia and Benshangul situation. As far as I know, there have not been opportunities for these people to vote, and there have not been particular polling stations assigned for them. So, of course, that's also one of the challenges this country is facing now. And don't misunderstand me. I would not recommend Ethiopia to go back to the repression and control that was happening during the EPRF time. That's not what I want, and I agree completely with what John said, that elections under unstable circumstances are better than no elections. And but what I am saying is that the potential for instability and violence in the wake of these elections may be bigger than it was during the heyday of the EPRF, because they had this repression capacity that the Prosperity Party does not have now.
Well, you have touched on a number of things. Maybe we could go deeper into some of the issues. This is the impact of the war in Tigray, and also the kind of external pressure that Ethiopia is subjected to, including the sanctions that the US has imposed, with a possible follow-up by the European Union. So what is the impact of all this on the election process? And the EU already has had problem with the observers, withdrawn observers on technical grounds. Do you think, however, of course, there are 2 American observers that have been approved, and also I think the civil society network, which is much more robust than it was before, has been very much engaged in not only in the election monitoring, but also in the pre-election education and so on, and post-election also peacekeeping. So how do you assess the observer status of the elections, of these elections compared to the previous elections?
The status of the observers, yeah, well, I mean, it's deeply regrettable that the EU has withdrawn observers because of these 2 conditions they imposed upon the Ethiopian on the Nebe. namely having their own independent VSAT communication system, apart from Ethio Telecom, as well as reserving the rights, unilaterally reserving the right to make all kinds of comments and statements on the process before the final results, before the results by NEBE were announced. So they could nicely interfere in the whole process. I can understand, maybe, yeah, it's controversial, the decision, but I can understand that the NEBE says, no, thank you, then go away, then leave, then don't come. Look, it's a pity that the international observer contingent is limited, but the elections can also do without them. There is the American NDI IRI contingent. That's a substantial group. But much more important is that there are 45 local civil society organizations monitoring the elections, 45 Ethiopians. And believe me, they will be very critical. I mean, these people, this is a young generation of intellectually and technologically savvy people who will critically follow all aspects of the elections. In that respect, we can really follow what they are going to say about the process and about the incidents and so on, the flaws in their reports, and that will give us a very good indication of the nature of the democratic nature of the elections, in line with what Lovisa was demanding, namely applying, let's say, objective criteria to judge it. I think they will do a good job in that. So if we link to the issue of Tigray, of course, this is the most tragic thing going on right now. The conflict in Tigray, the suffering on all sides. I mean, I agree with the fact that many responses internationally on the war, as well as on the post-war, the post-conflict situation, or whatever you may call it, by foreign observers and the press is highly dubious and highly contextless. They always forget how it started on 4 November at night with this terrible slaughter, and they forget the big ethnic massacre in Maikada on 9 November. These two things have such an incredible impact. You cannot take people who did this seriously as a political partner. That's for sure. It will not happen. It will not happen. But nevertheless, now we see that the region of Tigray is not capable to hold the elections. That's, of course, that's obvious. This really dents the legitimacy of the project, the process. It's very regrettable. But like always happened in the past in the Somali region, all the previous elections under Ihagig, Somali region always came a couple of months later than the rest of the country. The same situation will happen with Tigray. Hopefully, there will be some stabilization. There will be some voice of reason emerging among post-TPLF political groups who reorient themselves or redefine themselves and prepare to engage with the interim government and with the federal government. And then, you know, conditions for a kind of electoral process could be held. I fear it will take more than 2-3 months. But of course, the intention, as I see it from the NEBE, is to hold elections in Tigray as well. But indeed, it is, you know, yeah, it's a deep pity to see this conflict having limited the range and the extent of the electoral process in the country as a whole. And there is no easy solution for that. We have to wait. We have to see how things stabilize. We have to see whether responsible parties willing to enter into dialogue rather than exchange of bullets will emerge, so as to start this process.
Okay, thank you. Professor Kasaon, would you like to come in on both aspects, because they are kind of interrelated, because the external pressure has come because of the crisis in Tigray, but the war in Tigray or the crisis in Tigray has its own history and its own implication as well. So maybe you could address both aspects of the problem. And the question of external observers, both internal and external observers.
Well, I understand the concerns raised with regard to human rights violations and atrocities raised by EU the United States government, so on and so forth. Because most importantly, the issue of human rights is more or less a universal value. One should not be an Ethiopian to raise concerns about human rights that violations and atrocities that are committed. I also understand that the government is saying that it has started taking measures and has agreed to co-investigate what has transpired on the ground in Tigray, particularly by closely working with the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. I don't deny that some excesses, some atrocities have been committed in Tigray. Most importantly, the people of Tigray and Tigray as a region, the people of Tigray are our compatriots. We are closer to them than the US or Europe is. So in as long as these things that target innocent people and whoever, particularly even including those that are parties to the conflict, meaning their treatment after their capture, so on and so forth, would be also our concern. As you are aware, Tigray is the genesis of our statehood, our nationhood, so on and so forth. I don't complain much if they are really interested in voicing the plights of the people of Tigray. But we know most of these governments have worked with atrocious human rights violators in the different parts of the world. They have worked with Pinochet in Chile. They have worked with Mobutu in Africa, among others. And they have worked with gross human rights violators in Ethiopia too, except the Mengistu regime, both under imperial rule and APRDF rule. So the impact of the pressure, I can't deny that there would be adverse impacts in different fields of what Ethiopia is planning or has planned to undertake. But when it comes to the issue of infringing on sovereignty of the country, then whatever might be the consequence, nobody should cherish the illusion that they would have a free ride in this regard. Because some of the things that they are presenting by way of prescription is one, unbecoming in general, not to use other foul language, an expression, a manifestation of arrogance, a manifestation of ignorance of knowing Ethiopia and the Ethiopian people. But whatever the consequence, this may not be acceptable, but it would have some impact, and we'll try to withstand whatever comes around. Regarding the observers, yes, it would have been good, particularly in the quest for international legitimacy, if EU, US observers come in, behave according to the required standards, and report their findings as they used to do before. The EU, US, and other observers, except very few. I remember the European Union observation team leader, Ana Gomez, the Norwegian observer team, including our colleague here and others that are not around, made reports of some acts of impunity that have taken place during the electoral process in the early 2000s, so on and so forth, including 1995. None of these governments that are making noises now have heeded the advice, the findings of their own delegation, their own observer missions regarding the conflict in Tigray.
Okay, because there was this agreement for conducting a survey or an investigation into the alleged atrocities in Tigray with the United Nations Human Rights Commission in collaboration with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. In fact, one of the things that you did not mention, Kasaon, in your earlier panoramic view of the changes that have happened is really the robust Ethiopian Human Rights Commission that has been put in place, which has been very credible and so on. So they are working on it. They have agreed to conduct a survey and eventually come up with a report, but for some reason the Americans were not willing to wait until they hear the report. So I don't understand why. Maybe Dr. Allen, you could address this as well as the other questions that were posed.
Well, I cannot take the responsibility of defending the US. I can't. But I think, Kasahun, you mentioned that Western analysts, most of the time, they do not talk about the genesis of the war in Tigray. And that is disregarded now because people are preoccupied with the atrocities going on at the moment. I think you're right in one way, and that also may lead us as foreigners not to understand that the Tigray war has a lot of support in Ethiopia because it was seen as a just start of the war, because the TPLF was posing an obstacle to changing Ethiopia as most Ethiopians would like it to be. But now, as the war has evolved, with the interference of or the collaboration with the Eritrean forces and the conduct of the Amhara militia, it has changed the whole dynamic, in my view. So even though you could have argued that it was a just motivation for starting the war, the way it has evolved makes it really understandable that the international community is reacting. So you can say that they have collaborated with Pinochet, with all kinds of authoritarian regimes in the past. That's correct, and US has its own interests. But that doesn't mean that it is justifiable to turn a blind eye to what appears to be and using sexual violence as an instrument of war, for example, where we have increasingly corroborated reports from Tigray at the moment. So I can, even though I am not representing the US or see myself as a typical Westerner looking at Ethiopia from outside, I can understand the reactions and that there is a need for saying something when these things are going on. Was there any other issue I should address?
About the question of the observers, maybe?
Yes, and I agree completely that it's very unfortunate that the EU was withdrawing, that they're not coming to observe. They have played an important role in the past. It's always controversial with international observers. Either you could argue that they whitewash authoritarian elections by being there, or that they actually scrutinize and come up with important inputs and reports afterwards, as they did in the 2005 elections, for example. So I think it's unfortunate. I'm hoping that the civil society organization in Ethiopia can play an important role. In the past, they have been sidelined. They have not had the mandate to really play a role in giving inputs to improve the electoral process. I hope that will be the case now, that they have the mandate and the independence. But of course, there are, as I said previously, there are reports of interventions in the electoral process already, particularly maybe in Oromia, which is a worrying signal. If they continue the practices from the past, observers would not have that mandate to observe independently. But of course, the electoral board is stronger than before, which of course gives hope.
Thank you. Incidentally, as I said earlier, there are 2 American international observers in addition to the civil society network that is doing the observation here. Maybe you would like Kasaun and John to react to the question of the Amhara forces and the Eritrean forces in Tigray.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
yeah,
it's a moot point, indeed. It's understandable in the context of the history of the conflict. The conflict did not start now, but started in 1992 when Wolkite, Eland, and Tigray were annexed by Tigray without any consultation of the local population to Tigray. And what happened then in the area is nothing short of scandalous. I mean, I won't go into the details, but there was abuse of the local population, there was chasing out of people, there was import of new people, highly problematic history of the past 30 years in Wolkite and so forth. And there you have, you know, the historical identities and the historical preoccupations of Ethiopians in northern Ethiopia. These things are not forgotten. So when this war started, and also started by TPLF on the federal army, it came in circumstances where the federal army was weak. They could hardly match the attack of the TPLF. They attacked not only in Mekelle and Dansha air camps, army camps, but they attacked 198 other places across Tigray. So as part of the federal security structure, one might say, the government can call upon regional militias, be it Oromo militia, Somali militia, or Amhara militia, the regional army. And that's what happened. Coupled with the fact that many Amhara had this, you know, the sadness or preoccupation with Wolkite and its history of being alienated from the historic Amhara country as they saw it, it was somehow understandable that they got involved. So, but one can, so understandable. It's another issue whether this is the solution for the local problems of boundaries and of identities. That is which stability returns. And this will probably lead to the fact that some of the areas now were taken over or retaken, or whatever you might call it, by Amhara forces will have to be returned or will have to be negotiated. That's for sure. But again, here the understanding of context is important. The categorical demand from the Americans by Secretary of Blinken, who was 2 months in power, and he said the Amhara forces have to leave Tigray. What does he know? Who told him that? Who told him to bring up this bloody point, this point at all? Because of certain links with that the State Department had with other groups which told him bring up the point. This is not the context to discuss these things. So it is problematic. The presence, also problematic, of course, is the presence of the Eritrean forces. But again, this was also unfortunately denied by Abiy in the beginning, by Prime Minister Abiy. That is unfortunate. But the presence and the entry of the Eritrean forces in November was partly because of the fact that they wanted to prevent the TPLF force from taking over the trench system on the border with Eritrea. If the TPLF would have taken over the trench system along the border, then you would have a real problem. So that was partly self-defense by the Eritreans. And the Eritrean record in Tigray is not very positive, that's for sure. It is sometimes horrific, and it must be dealt with. And what I understand from various reports from the field by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, as well as from the Attorney General, they have started all these investigations into rape cases, into abuse, into illegal killings. And there are already about 50 judicial cases started against these abuses. So it is not, I do not accept the statement made by some, especially in the Western press, that the use of sexual violence, the use of, you know, specifically targeting civilians is an aim of war. That is not the case. Any war deranges, any war goes wrong. Any war has these terrible incidents. You know, we had in Holland, we had a war in Indonesia in 1948. We were a democratic country. We committed horrific abuse in the War of Independence in Indonesia, which was suppressed for decades and now coming out. In any war, even if there is, you know, the right to war, the jus ad bellum, if it's justified, if it's a just war, so to speak, you have these abuses. So they have to be tackled. And as far as I'm aware, the federal government, through its various institutions, has expressed a willingness to tackle these cases. I hope they do it. I hope they keep their promise. Otherwise, they will, you know, undermine their legitimacy and their support. But I think, as the process has already started, there is some hope that these perpetrators will be grabbed, will be taken to court, and ultimately there should be a negotiated solution towards the status of the Amhara regional forces, as well as of the Eritreans, who of course ideally would withdraw as soon as possible, which still has not been happening. So yeah, these things have to be seen in their context, the context of the evolving conflict, and are not easily solved. I have no totally, of course, I have no totally acceptable and plausible solution to that, but we have to tackle that step by step in view of the enormous challenges which were created by this conflict in November last year, and then take it from there towards a political process. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Abing. Kasaon, would you like to come in?
Yes. Well, I agree with Louisa on what she said about past doings of the US, which does not prevent them from making correct and appropriate statements at this point in time. Yes, they can make. But in both cases, unfortunately, they go wrong. They go off target. It does not mean that they should not be concerned, as I tried to state earlier. The Eritrean interference. Well, it's not yet clear or abundantly clear to all of us on how they got in, but I can imagine that prior to their interference, rockets were launched by the TPLF forces designed to fall even in residential areas in Asmara. They did not react immediately to that. But the issue is, what even if the Ethiopian government formally invited the Eritrean forces to come in, given that the bulk of the Ethiopian army based at the Northern Command has been significantly destroyed? Are there no precedents for such kind of invitations and interventions? Even recently, the Ugandan government the South Sudanese government invited Ugandan forces to come and quell or arrest the situation that could have led to the disintegration of the country. Was not Ethiopia invited in 2006-7, at the end of 2006, by the transitional federal government to intervene in Somalia to offset the onslaughts of the Al-Shabaab for the Islamic courts and the Al-Shabaab forces? So, is it not a legitimate prerogative of a given government to do so? The atrocities, whoever did it, I admit that some level of atrocity have been committed, including sexual violence. This should be stopped. Culprits should be identified and punished, to which the government has agreed to undertake and pursue the matter even with the Eritrean regime for the misdeeds that its soldiers have perpetrated. Withdrawal of the Amhara forces. At times, some of the press, the media outlets in your part of the world say neighboring Tigray, presenting Tigray as if it is a separate country. Not yet, actually. And I don't believe that it can do, even whoever wants that. Amhara forces. I am sufficiently aware how the Amhara forces reacted. Simultaneous attacks, one in Mekelle on the Northern Command headquarters, two on the special forces entrenched in Amhara territories adjacent to Tigray. They, at a place called Karagar in Dallamt. They repulsed the onslaughts. Then the wheel began rolling until they overran the entire Western Tigray region, including the Walqait area. So who is anyone to say that Ethiopian forces should withdraw from Ethiopian territory? If similar mishaps occur in Amhara region, in Oromia region, it would be incumbent on the federal government to mobilize forces from Tigray special forces, Somali special forces, to contain the effects and the dire consequences resulting from this thing. Sexual violence, yes, I believe, though I am not there, I believe that this has been committed. And the important ramification of embarking on joint investigation of what has happened, the degree and the extent, could have brought the real figure, the real scope. But the West is not interested in urging the United Nations, High Commissioner for Human Rights, to work in tandem with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, for which the government has given the green light, but they want to harp to the tune of propagandists, lobbyists, and the interested power groups in the West, rather than bringing the full picture and supporting subsequent activities that are aimed at stopping the violence, such kind of atrocity, and at punishing perpetrators. So this is what happened. Who is Blinken to tell us that until he engages us and defeats us in the battlefield, he can't dictate terms to us?
So, I mean, past misdeeds can, of course, explain a lot of what has happened in Tigray today, but it does not justify what goes on at the moment. This is my clear understanding. And when you talk about whether there will be an end to hostilities, what's going to happen in Tigray afterwards? you talk about the elections, you talk about 2-3 months, you talk about the interim administration. My worry and understanding as the conflict has been evolving now is that it's maybe no way back for, or the way the conflict has then turned towards ordinary Tigrayans is making it very difficult to re-establish Tigray as a normal member of the Ethiopian Federation. I mean, it takes years, maybe decades, to rebuild a relationship between the federal government and Tigrayan population. So I think this has lasting ramification for Ethiopia.
Thank you. I think we should move on now because the security problem is not only in Tigray, but also in other parts of Ethiopia, as already indicated, like Benishangul, Oromia, and so on. So, I mean, there are two things. One, in view of the security problem that we have, and secondly, in view of the rather new institutional experience, the lack of institutional experience of the electoral board, you may say. It is new, but also it's brand new. So in that sense, it does not have really the experience to conduct elections, efficiently, as you can see from the shifting schedule in particular. So how do you think these problems, the security problem and the lack of institutional experience of the electoral board, which in a way was a positive thing because it is better than the previous one, but also in some sense, there are quite a number of glitches in the way it has been preparing the elections. So in view of this, do you anticipate any problems in the outcome of the elections, or the conduct as well as the outcome of the elections?
Okay, so there have been major logistical problems in the preparation of the elections, both in distributing material and in registration. Of course, that is anticipated in a situation where there is lack of security on the ground. There are now a number of constituencies where there will be no elections because of irregularities in Somali region and in other places. And as I have mentioned before, there is also concern for interference from local officials and some pressure to register as voters, as we have seen in the previous elections. There are new mechanisms that have been established by the electoral board. The grievance, what was it called? A grievance mechanism to address irregularities and complaints. And then you have the joint party committee that is also going to address irregularities. If these are up and working, they could be representing a progress when it comes to comparing with the previous elections. But of course, it really depends on whether the electoral board and the ruling party is sending out strong enough signals to restrain those government officials and party officials on the ground that have in the past been acting on behalf of the ruling party to prevent opposition from competing on equal ground. So I am not convinced that this election will be so different as I've said before. But I still have a hope because there are some new mechanisms that have been established, and I hope that they will be given some mandate to solve issues.
Thank you. Let me turn to the two other panelists, Professor Abink and Professor Kassaun, in that order probably.
Okay. Security, inexperience of the Navy and the range. These three issues, yes, they will complicate the smooth and complete unfolding of the elections. They will limit the turnout. They will lead to multiple incidents and cases to be brought before the grievance committee as well as the party forums, no doubt about it. We'll see when that happens. This election will be a relative success compared to other ones, previous ones, if a substantial number of opposition party candidates will enter the parliament. Then you have, that is the ultimate and the primary and ultimate test of these elections. Whatever the coverage of these elections in the country, the coverage, as we have discussed previously extensively, will be problematic. Not in Tigray, not in the southwest of Ethiopia because of this referendum on a new ethnic region, not in parts of Somali, not in parts of Wollega and Benishangul, probably. Unfortunate, but understandable because of the unacceptable security problems caused by these insurgent nihilistic people who have no program except killing, it seems. Nevertheless, if the process in the majority of constituencies delivers candidates and are confirmed, and a substantial number of them are from the opposition parties, then we have made a giant leap forward. If that is not the case, if the Prosperity Party would win all the seats, supported by the first past the post system, then I would subscribe to Louise's conclusion that these elections will not be different from any of the previous ones. But I highly doubt that. I do totally not agree with this statement that they will in practice not be different from the previous ones. They will be very different. They are already much different. The campaigns, the debates, the number of free floating observer missions from domestic civil society groups, it is already much different. And also the attitudes of the government, including the prime minister. You cannot discard his I think genuine concern that these elections will mean something, will be some kind of step towards maturity. He is not talking nonsense. He's not talking empty when he says that he wants these elections to be competitive. He really means that. He needs also well represented opposition groups in the parliament, and that will happen. If that fails, as I said, then we have a problem. So, but indeed, I mean, we should not take lightly the huge challenges made by posed by the security situation. It's deeply regrettable. It is produced by people who have no faith in any representative democratic mechanisms, but who want to force their rule, their regional rule or whatever rule, by arms, by killing people, by the expulsion of people of a so-called different ethnicity. They will not be successful. They will make produce needless suffering, but they will not, dent the legitimacy of the process which has been started. Having said all this, and with all the provisos and with all the remarks about the less than perfect proceedings of these elections, we know that it is still a major step forwards. And as I said, we can only definitely answer this question when we have a substantial number of opposition people in the parliament. And I personally think that will happen.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I agree that each of us are entitled to our respective opinions, but disagree on the contents. This is normal. I start by stating that I subscribe to some important adages or adages in political science. The worst form of government is better than no government. A distorted constitution is better than no constitution. And a lousy election is better than no election. So I start from this. I do not share Louisa's, if I may say, pessimism that connecting with the people of Tigray would be far-fetched. I know it's not easy, but through proactive healing, I'm sure the people of Tigray are most capable in understanding how the mishaps have evolved and identify each party to the conflict, gives them their respective responsibilities. Most importantly, about 45 years ago, the TPLF started with expediting the secession of Tigray as a pseudo-democratic republic. But among others, it is the people of Tigray that pointedly rejected this trend, which forces the TPLF to drop it as if it is a hot potato. It's unfortunate that the people of Tigray are affected by this incident, which is to whose making they have not contributed. When Louisa presents or stated her position, she says the federal government and the people of Tigray. The conflict started between the federal government and the criminal fugitive group, the TPLF, leadership for that matter. It's not with the people of Tigray that Ethiopia was trying to grapple, and therefore it would be very, it would be politically wrong to put this in this manner, though you are entitled to that. So I don't believe, of course, the people of Tigray have been victimized in the course of the occurrence of collateral damage. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think we are coming towards the end of our discussion. The dreaded point. This is the post-election scenario. Many people actually are very apprehensive of this election because they remember what happened in 2005, the post-election. What started as a very promising exercise ended up with bloodshed and the killing of about 200 people. And then, of course, all the avalanche of repressive laws that followed. So what do you anticipate? I mean, it's very difficult. It's not very actually fair to ask you to anticipate the post-election scenario, but in view of your experience of elections, in view of your experience of Ethiopian politics, do you anticipate the same kind of scenario, or are there forces and mechanisms in place that would prevent this kind of outbreak of post-election violence in Ethiopia? Who would like to start? I see Louisa shaking your head.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, okay. I'm not a fortune teller, of course, but looking at the episodes of violence that has taken place after Abiy came to power in 2018, apart from the war in Tigray and apart from the state of emergency in Oromia, you can see that it's very events easily trigger violence. You had the whole situation around Jawar Mohammed, around Hajjalo's killing. So when you look at this situation, it is anticipated, unfortunately, that some disagreements or misconduct during election or unclarity about results could trigger violence. You have easily mobilized youth groups in all the different ethnic constituencies around the country that would probably have little to lose by going out on the streets. And the situation is tense. So I am surprised if the post-election will be completely peaceful. Another post-election scenario, which I think also is very important to address, maybe not related directly to violence, is the internal tension within the Prosperity Party. It's very likely that the Prosperity Party will win Oromia. It may also be likely that they will win in Amhara. The Prosperity Party in Amhara and Oromia are not on the same page. They have very different visions of what Prosperity Party rule would mean. Some people have the hope that the elections and bringing about a strong Prosperity Party could bring an opportunity to talk about and discuss the Ethiopian constitution, maybe to rewind or to take away the ethnic federal system, having a citizen-based system in Ethiopia instead. But if the Prosperity Party in Oromia is winning, it will be very, very difficult for the Prosperity Party there to argue for this kind of model. You can just see the contestation about the control of Addis Ababa, about the importance of Oromo identity, of stating and celebrating that, which is in direct conflict with many of the ideas of the Amhara nationalists. So I would also draw some attention to that, and maybe I would also think that that will be an issue that has to be dealt with in one way or another if the Prosperity Party is coming out as the winner and with a strong mandate. It's not clear what that mandate is, because there are different visions of Ethiopia within the Prosperity Party, and who Abiy is relying on and who he decides to side with is not it's not clear at the moment.
Okay, thank you. But I think there is a general consensus that the federal system is here to stay. I don't think there is anybody in Ethiopia in his right mind who would like to scrap the federal system. It's really the way it's arranged. What form of
I agree.
This is
thank you for that clarification.
Okay, John, would you like to come in?
Yeah, first I agree with the last remark.
Yeah.
That the federal system is there to stay, because historically Ethiopia was federal and it's now federal. Only the basis of it might be changed and might be socially engineered, so to speak, because we have to, I think, look, we are now in Ethiopia is stuck with the federal model instituted by the EPRDF since 1992. And that is, we are really stuck with that. It is a system which has never worked in any country in the world, really. Ethnic politics and making ethnicity the prime political identity of citizenship is not working and will always lead to harsh confrontations and violence. It has to be amended. It has to be somehow amended. No, notwithstanding the fact that you cannot deny and will not deny effectively the ethno-regional identities of regions, of peoples. You have to work on that. But the future is a kind of dual identity system, federal, regional, which would be integrated in a productive manner. So that's one, of course. The question is post-election violence to come after the elections. Yeah, again, we cannot foretell. But look, I would say that the pre-election situation is already very violent. I mean, we are in the midst of violence everywhere. So it can be more after the elections, but I think it will, when violence breaks out after the elections, if they are going according to what the NEBE and the government plan to, and namely orderly and so forth, and giving due respect and due place to opposition forces, then there will not be any specific reason to contest the elections because of the procedures, like there was in 2005. In 2005, it was manifestly tampered with by the government, and then you got, these massive street demonstrations specifically arguing against the devious manipulation of the results. These things will probably not happen now, because there is more transparency, there is enormous monitoring of all these domestic observers, there is the constant reiteration also by Prosperity Party leadership to not push inordinate advances and so forth, inordinate advantages in the campaigning, but at least respect the opposition, do not denigrate them like happened under EPRDF. They had no legitimate existence even under EPRDF. I can cite the leaders, I won't do that. This will not happen in this election, I think. There will, of course, be groups like the ones who boycotted themselves out of the elections to take a pretext and start rioting. That may happen, certainly. That may happen. But that will not be convincing, and that will be self-defeating in the long run. So it will happen, but the legitimacy of these protests will not be like the ones we saw in 2005, which were fully understandable and justified. So there will be some tensions, there will be violent incidents, certainly, but not with the idea that they will have any results and any way forward. And remember what I said just now. We have already a substantial situation of pre-election violence. Hopefully, that will be tackled after the elections. The ethnic killings and everything, and the IDP problems and so forth. That has to be tackled after the elections. What I hope is that when a multi-party parliament is convened, that these things will be that the situation will be going towards a new national dialogue, a new national discussion on outstanding issues in the country. That is extremely important, and that will be possible much better in a pluriform parliament than in the one we have now. There will be, as Louisa said, this issue of internal Prosperity Party tensions. I think there is something like that. There's a real issue lurking in the background. Yeah, I'm not sure how far it will be taken. Both parts of the Prosperity Party in Amhara region and Oromia region will insist on their regional autonomy. They will try to administratively and otherwise extend that. I'm not sure if when they win, that it will necessarily lead to a unsurmountable problem between the two parts of the Prosperity Party. I don't think so. It may also be an advantage that in the security of their being dominant, that they will be more in a position to negotiate their outstanding differences. Anyway, the problem which is complicating these elections is the divisive legacy of 27 years of ethnic politics under the previous regime. That is the main problem which is blighting the political process, because the model of ethnic politics has been totally internalized by people. The current generation knows no other politics. They think that democracy equals ethnic politics. Well, nothing is further from the truth. Ethnic politics is not democracy, not at all. You must have a different, you cannot equate it. You have to have a different approach where ethnic elements and rights are being incorporated into a wider framework of democratic rights linked to overall citizenship. If that thing is sorted out, if these questions are sorted out in the elections, in the representation of parties in the parliament, and in future parliamentary House of Representatives dialogue, then we are getting somewhere. So let's hope for that.
I would be naive if I try to say that the post-election situation would be completely peaceful. But I won't be in a position to exaggerate the degree and extent of mishaps that could occur, which could cause some inconveniences. There would be, I may even be wrong to say this. Probably people might, even if they have certain disaffections and disagreements, they might want to give it a try because we had a whole lot of violence during the last 5 years. But let me keep myself safe and say that sporadic outbursts might be experienced. divergence between different branch offshoots of the ruling party, yes, we are aware. In a way, this may be healthy because political parties, on the basis of certain principles, should engage in struggle. As Marx used to say, a party that does not purge itself is bound to perish. So my expectation is that well, I know that there are zealots, extremist zealots on both sides of the divide, but a party line that can evolve as a result of inner party struggles may straighten things out. Anyway, that's okay. If they continue with the trends that we have so far experienced, then no doubt the outcome would be devastating. But my expectation is that this will come to line, particularly as we, some of or many of us expect, they come to power through electoral mandate, then they would have more room for operational freedom. The issue of the list of the order of business following the election, my thinking is that the party that is to form the government should make it a priority to hold a national dialogue forum on which such issues as constitutional revision or amendment, the federal system as it stands now, the electoral system would be among the top in the list. Frankly speaking, as you all know, particularly Louisa, we did not yet have a federal system, whatever the posturing and the pretension. Now, as Professor Baharu said, I have never heard anyone, even some of those that we are suspecting of being revanchists, questioning the ramifications of federalism, given our situation, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious, multicultural, so on and so forth. Up to now, we didn't have a federal system, only the caricature, only the pretension that we had. The divergences on the issue of whether it should continue as ethnic-oriented federalism or should have some change in form. The electoral system, we have the first past the post system, which is still exercised. I don't think that the first past the post system by itself has problems. If you want to infuse problems, even the proportional representation system, the mixed system could have problems, because as you are aware, many countries, developing, so on and so forth, are using this the first past the post system, but in the manner that it was being expedited has led to a situation where the different interests and choices have been relegated to the background. So the issue of dialogue, who is to participate in the dialogue? Some of them are saying, we opposition and ruling parties come and put in place a provisional or government or a government of national unity. But this is an affair of the state. And As regards the state, it is an affair of the 150 million people. It's not only few unrooted or uprooted political parties that decide on the destiny of 100 million people or the destiny of the country. There was much noise about attempts to reinstate the unitary system of the old days or something like that, and destroy the federal system. In practice, was not in existence, and therefore divergence between the different parties should be strictly managed in a manner that could lead to unity of thought and purpose.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you all. We're coming to the last part of the session, and which is to address some of the questions raised by the audience. Actually, there are not that many. I think we have only two. I think at least I could group into two. Let me begin with the first one. It's a question from, actually, Kasaon already anticipated it when he talked about the dialogue, but it's only a matter of the order in which it should be held. The question from Asafa Fasa: should not dialogue be a priority over the election? And another question related to this from Nathaniel Solomon: do you think election would help solve the political gridlock Ethiopia finds itself in? So these are kind of interrelated. So Kasaon, you have already addressed the question of dialogue, but the question is, should it come before the election? Your scenario is after the election. This is actually saying that it should come before the election. So maybe while you think about it, let me turn to the other Slovisa about the dialogue, the question of dialogue. Should it be a priority, or should it be something that you can think about? Of course, I mean, there is no way that you can move the election now. But what is your view on the question of a national dialogue?
Yes. So, of course, these two processes are not mutually exclusive. I mean, you can have elections and then you can have initiatives of national dialogue at the same time. Of course, the question is who will be participating in this dialogue. It is, of course, important that those who are part of it are having some kind of legitimacy or constituency or credibility in the face of the Ethiopian people. There have been interesting suggestions from Ethiopian as well as foreign analysts that instead of having an election now, there should be postponement and there should be a technocratic government installed, which I think is, I mean, how can you envision any kind of trust the public will have in a technocratic government in this context? So I think elections are, they have to happen, and then most likely and most practically would be then to have a dialogue going on at just immediately after the elections, with a very very strict concern of the participation of civil society organizations representing all kinds of different interests, not only political parties, I think would be important. And you know, we have had this kind of consultation processes in the past. During the EPRF, you had the constitutional process, for example, where there was a quite extensive process on the ground, but it did not really open up for any kind of changes of what was already decided when the TPLF had its founding, or EPRF came to power. So the popular consultations were not really something that changed anything. So, you know, if there are going to be a national dialogue involving popular consultations, it has to open up for real input from those who are participating. Yes, but it's not very easy to know, and there are probably few examples where these have been successful in a very polarized situation as you have in Ethiopia today.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, the first thing as to dialogue now or after elections, I think I agree with both previous speakers that it cannot be before the elections. The elections would produce some kind of legitimacy for the potential partners for such a national dialogue. If you would do it before the election, you get eternal debates and wranglings about who is going to be invited. Are the armed groups going to be invited? Is TPLF remnants going to be invited? That assumes that they want to, which is not probably not the case. So I think it's not very useful to. It sounds great, of course. Dialogue. The word dialogue is so positive. Everybody starts to smile when you hear it, but it's not feasible. You have to be practical. It will not work before the elections. It can't work. The parliament will be a forum, and then after the parliament decides on this kind of thing in a national dialogue, it could be extended partly parliamentary and externally parliamentary outside of the parliament as a kind of standing conference on stakeholder consultation of parties, also the ones not represented in the parliament, as well as of civil society groups which have a political or other socially important role as a consultative, negotiable, deliberative body. That would be great. But as I see it, I think it should indeed be after the elections and not now. And it's too late anyway, of course. And it has also been tried in the past 2.5 years. It has been tried by the Prime Minister to have such consultative meetings with political parties and so forth. And there are all kinds of fora which at some point did not work or did not work enough. So I think the first step now is to really get a kind of electoral process finished and the results accepted and the new parliament in place, and then take up the idea of national dialogue to involve also the now armed factions, into some kind of engagement. The second issue would elect. So that's a second question. Maybe I should later.
Thank you, Kasal.
Well, ideally, I think that dialogue should have preceded elections, but given the situation we are in, that won't be the case. Among other things, because if we are to embark on national dialogue of a serious nature, then we have to take around a year or more to organize the dialogue forum, because you have to bring in legitimate, authentic representatives of different sections of society, the government, political parties, citizens associations like mass-based associations, youth, women groups, civil society organizations, religious groups, the representatives, of course, the private sector, so on and so forth. You have to develop rules of procedure, the agendas on which the participants should agree, and how to deliberate on a number of multitude issues that are worth considering. So if we try to embark on dialogue and postpone the election by a year or more, then the same people who are saying election should go on now might pose challenge, and those who say that elections should be postponed would reverse their position and say, why postpone? This have been experienced till now. It's not an easy thing. because organization of such a mechanism should be elaborately undertaken. How to reach a decision on some issues that can be decided by consensus or majority vote, some issues that should be subjected to a popular referendum, so on and so forth. So elaborate mechanisms. Therefore, under the circumstance we are in, unfortunately, or fortunately for that matter, dialogue cannot be a priority over the elections.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we just have one final question. There's a cascade of some other chats, but I don't think we have time for any more. And this comes from Ambassador Heru Emmanuel, who is incidentally a board member of our GGA Eastern Africa. So this is a request to kind of disaggregate the competitiveness that we talked about by region. So, how is the competitiveness in particular regions such as Somalia, Somali region, South region, Amara and Addis Ababa. And then also that the referendum that is being undertaken in the southern region, the referendum for Kelil status, does it also have an impact on the elections? So these are the questions, the final questions that we'll address. Just maybe a couple of minutes more, since we are running out of time. Just a couple of minutes each, I think would be sufficient. Kind of disaggregating the level of competitiveness in the different regions and also the implications of this referendum for regional status that is being conducted in the southern region, whether it would have impact on the elections as well. Yeah, let me begin with John.
Yeah, thanks. On the last point, the referendum issue on the southwest region, you know, it's a kind of referendum being prepared about in Kafa Sheka, Ben Sheko, Dauro, and West Omo zones and Konta special districts to form a southwest state. Yeah, of course, it has an impact because elections will not be held in that area. It will not now be held because they are involved in preparing the referendum. I'm not sure if it's a good idea to form another regional state and so forth. I'm not sure. Let me refrain comments on that. It's the area where I do a lot of field work. I know this West Omo zone very well, but yeah, maybe it's again part of the quest for regional elites to form and to secure a place. I'm not sure. But anyway, elections will not be held. They will be held later when that referendum is clear, and then they might hold elections for the parties and so forth in that southwest state. On the first issue, it's a very good point to disaggregate the competitiveness of the elections per region, per regional state. Yeah, very good point. Interesting, very interesting. And there you see big differences, I think. Absolutely. It will, look, let me take the biggest one. It will be very competitive in Amara regional states between the Prosperity Party, Izema in the urban areas, and the Nama. These three will be the big contenders, I think, and with minority representation for the Ethiopian Social Democratic Party and so forth. But these three will be the big competitors, and it's by far not sure who will come out first. So this is very competitive. The largest region, Oromia region, yeah, the competitiveness is much less because two of the big Oromo parties have been so wise as to talk themselves out of the process, OFC and OLF. So yeah, I fear that the Prosperity Party will win the day there with some urban representation, urban votes for the other parties. And in the rest of the country, it will be more mixed. I think in Somali, obviously, it will also be a bit less competitive than in Amara region because of the fact that the Somali affiliate of the Prosperity Party will probably win the day. You could also disaggregate the competitiveness of the regions in terms of the social, educational, and economic characteristics of the population. That would give you an indication of how competitive the elections would be, because you know the common people in Ethiopia have a very good political sense, But if they are less on these indicators, they will tend to vote for the incumbent party, I fear. And in the South, it will be, I think, also competitive, very mixed picture. Some of the smaller parties beyond the big three, which I just mentioned, have a clear ethnic basis in the South. So there will be a lot of, differential representation of parties in the South. I think there will be many more than 3 that will send representatives to the national parliament. So anyway, I could go on with all the regions, but it's a very good point. It is very interesting to follow also in the actual results of the elections. So a mixed picture, very mixed picture, I think.
Okay, thank you, John. That's very elaborate reaction. Louise.
Yes. Okay. So I think I agree with John's analysis of the Amhara and Oromia situation, where you will have a very competitive situation in the Amhara region, and not in Oromia. In the South, I think it's quite interesting that there will be a referendum on the Southwest now. One group that has been really strong in advocating for their own region, the Walaitas, have not succeeded in reaching to that stage. And we have not really heard about what has happened to those political leaders of the Walaitas who were imprisoned after the conflict with Sidamas. It will be interesting to see whether the Sidama liberation movement is now completely pacified by the fact that there is now a Sidama zone, that the Prosperity Party will take all the seats because of that. How will the Walaitas be positioning themselves, because now they did not get what they wanted? So there is a completely different dynamic in the South, and it's very multifaceted in that region.
Well, I agree with what both have presented, but would like to say something on Addis Ababa. If I feel that this is not touched upon. I see competition between PP, IZEMA, or Ethiopian Citizens for Justice and Social Justice, or something like that, and the Balderas Party. There would be competition. That is, I have nothing more to add, but there is a query that stated whether elections can solve the Ethiopian deadlock or whatever. Well, I can't say it can completely solve all the problems that are around, but it would provide improved leverage for whoever wins to operate more freely and deal with some of this. The multitude of problems take time, apparently.
Well, I think we have come to the end of our discussion. It's been a very fruitful discussion. There have been some divergence and some convergence as well. We have ended, fortunately, on a note of convergence. So, well, we have some new developments compared to the earlier elections. But on the other hand, there is also possibly the danger of a deja vu, as Lovisa said. So it's too early to predict what the final outcome would be. At any case, I think we have explored all the different scenarios and the different implications, both the internal and the external pressures that has been surrounded this particular election. It's taking place at a very, very extraordinary time in Ethiopian history. I don't think there is a time when, let alone an election, even normal life has been conducted under such a barrage of international pressure and internal destabilization. But I think the consensus is the election is there. It has to be there. It has been postponed so many times, and there is no question of postponing it now. It will take place, and we can only hope for the best. That we hope it will not be attended by the kind of post-election violence that we witnessed in 2005, instead that it will hopefully be the beginning, at least, of some kind of electoral democracy, and open the way to the national dialogue that I think all of us are agreed upon. With that, I think I will just conclude my moderation and probably pass it on to Dr. Zarihun. I think who would like to come in and say a few words about the current the program and also the future plans. But for me, on my part, I would like to thank heartily the three panelists. They have done an excellent job in giving us various perspectives of the election. Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you, Professor Baru.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Baru, for moderating this usual and reserved support to us. And I would like to thank all panelists who are willing to come to this webinar in such a very short notice. And I would like to thank the Civil Society Resource Center with its staff, Amen, Zoha, Ade. They were really, really supportive. They are providing all this technical support, surprisingly, free of charge, including their office. So I also like to thank all the participants. I'm informed from the Resource Center that there are about 70 people attending this webinar from all over the world. So this is really one of the biggest events we organized such a short period of time. So we'll continue organizing similar webinars. Our objective as GJ is to create a platform where people will come and view their different arguments. That's where we can start the attempt to create good governance. We need to listen to one another. This is one of the culture we want to cultivate. So recently we'll continue conducting similar workshops. Obviously, as it was mentioned earlier, the war in Tigray is a very sensitive issue right now, both in domestic politics as well as in international media and international diplomacy. So that's a big issue. It has different branches. So we'll organize similar webinars on that issue. Also, there is a political discourse going on in this country. The implication of what's going on in Ethiopia on the regional peace and security is another issue. The war on terrorism is another area we want to explore. So again, I would like to thank all of you, the participants, the Resource Center, and hopefully we'll meet again, inshallah. Thank you very much.